Hello, 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 and welcome back to another edition of Fan Talk, your favorite podcast by, yeah, that's right, your favorite fan. You know how it goes here. It's K Branch in the house on this Wednesday, this frigid Wednesday. It is cold out there. The weather outside is frightful, but the Fan Talk podcast is so delightful. Whoa, look at me! I'm like illuminating, like I'm going to heaven or something. This is a nice little tease into what we're talking about today. The Holy War. I'll be telling you what that is. If you don't know what that is, hopefully you know what that is. But first, let me tell you, Fan Talk's a podcast by me, Kyle Brinchley. You can find it anywhere you get your podcast. I just like talking sports. So if you like listening to sports, then come on over, sit down, relax, and let's have a good time. Rogue One poster is there as always. The candle is burning. There's a new Star Wars show that's going to be coming out in December called The Skeleton Crew. Naturally, I'm skeptical ever since Disney has taken over. The quality of product of Star Wars material has been very questionable. I mean, it doesn't look bad, but I'm just not really excited for it, if you know what I mean. Trailer's out now. You can go check it out. Jude Law stars as a former Jedi, pretty much just helping a bunch of kids. So, I don't know, kind of Goonies vibes. But, all right, there you go. We're doing things a little bit different today here on the podcast. We're not going to do the typical fan talk, fast talk. We're not going to do the typical slate of talking baseball. Obviously that's over. We're not going to be talking college basketball. We'll get to that another day. We'll get to hockey another day. We'll get to NFL, college football another day. Today, this episode is dedicated to a rivalry in college football. Now, rivalries in college football are probably just about the greatest things ever. They're so fun. It's fun to be a part of them. It's fun to experience them. It's fun to see them. There's just so much emotion, so much intensity, so much passion that goes into it. And today we're talking about one that is very close to home, literally. Or for those of you who may or may not know, I live in the state of Utah. And so we're talking about the Holy War. That is right. BYU versus Utah, the Holy War. Kind of a funny name. As I mentioned that, the heavens open up and heaven's light shines down upon me. But yeah, BYU and Utah, very intense rivalry, especially intense here in the state of Utah. You go outside of the state of Utah and definitely people don't have the intensity. There's bigger college football rivalries out there. Of course, you know, the Alabama, Auburn, Michigan, Ohio State, Florida, Georgia. I'm an Oklahoma fan, so Oklahoma State. You know, Arizona State. You know, there's plenty of big college football rivalries out there, but this one is no small potatoes, let me tell you. So BYU and Utah, where did they get the name, the Holy War? And before I jump into this, the reason I'm doing this is because they played. BYU and Utah, again, are now in the Big 12 football conference. And if you're living under a rock, this is news to you, but it's not news to everyone else. It's a conference matchup again, just like the good old days when they were in the Mountain West. So they're playing this Saturday. The game is in Salt Lake City, and we'll get to that. We'll kind of do a game preview. But first, let's learn the history on why BYU and Utah are even rivals. It's interesting how schools, universities, teams, whatever, they tend to be rivals with other teams that are close to them. Proximity is an interesting space to study, but it's like those who are closest to us are the ones we tend to hate the most, at least in the sports sense as we're talking about today. So the history of this rivalry actually dates back to 1922. Well, actually, if you ask Utah, it dates back to 1896. BYU doesn't start recording or start recognizing the start of the rivalry until 1922. So Utah is kind of like, oh, we played a couple games before 1922. BYU is like, well, 1922 is when we're going to officially start the story of the Holy War. So the term Holy War, it actually wasn't really used until the 1990s. And this is something interesting that I found out. It was a local sports talk host, radio host. I'd be really interested to find out who exactly it was. If you know who it was, comment down below, message me on Instagram. But they just coined the term on a radio show one day, and naturally it kind of stuck. Because for those of you who are not familiar with BYU and just the state of Utah in general, there are a lot of members of the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints who, I mean, obviously they kind of settled the state of Utah back in the 1800s. BYU stands for Brigham Young University. Brigham Young was one of the prophets for the church back in the 1800s. So the school is named after him. It's a church school, like the church owns and operates it. And so a lot of members of the church go to BYU. A lot of Utah's population are members of the church. So a lot of people who go to the University of Utah are also members of the church. So they kind of term this the Holy War because BYU is the church school. And Utah, of course, while not a church school, a public university, still has quite a bit of church members that either go there, who are alumni, who play for them, or who are just fans. So a kind of a term that, popped up in the 90s just from a local radio host guy. Maybe I should start coining some terms here on the podcast, and maybe one day it will land somewhere, some way, somehow. But anyways, so that started in the 90s. So before then, it was just, the BYU-Utah rivalry, which of course went back to 1922. Let me show you some statistics about the rivalry overall, and you can just look this stuff up. This is not, hidden information. You don't have to go to a deep, dark library to find this. It's just out there. But they've played a total of 101 times. That is quite a bit of meetings. This will be the 102nd meeting. All-time series, according to Utah, again, they recognized a few games before 1922. Utah leads the series at 62, 35, and 4. But according to BYU, Utah leads the series 59, 32, and 4. Regardless of who you ask, BYU or Utah, Utah has the series lead, has more wins. The largest margin of victory actually came in 1980. BYU won at 6-6. Wow, what a blowout! And that was back in the 80s, where it was more of a run first type of game. So I'd be curious to see highlights to that game. Longest winning streak, Utah currently, both teams, both Utah and BYU, their longest win streak has both been 9 games. Utah did it from 1929 to 1937. And then again, 2010 to 2019. BYU did it during the 80s when they were very dominant, and we'll be talking about that in a second. Longest unbeaten streak, Utah, 21 games. Again, they're going back past 1922 and counting. Pretty much the first 21 meetings, Utah won the first 21 games before BYU finally broke through. And then the current win streak, of course, BYU, the two teams matched up in 2021, and BYU won that game down in Provo, 26-17. They currently have the current win streak, which is at 1. So there's some stats for you. Obviously, there's a lot to dive into this Holy War, and there's a lot of different eras. It was kind of back and forth. Utah does have the advantage when it comes to performance and wins overall. But let me take you back through some of the game results throughout the years. So like I just barely mentioned, the first 21 meetings, Utah won. So BYU didn't win. Well, they were called BYU Brigham Young Academy, and Brigham Young Academy won a couple in the 1890s, but BYU doesn't count those because they weren't technically BYU yet. So from 1922 on, Utah won the first 22. BYU won their first in 1942, October 10th, 1942. BYU won 12-7, and then Utah continued to win for the next decade. Pretty much throughout the 50s and 60s, Utah dominated, and then came the 70s. From 1972 to 1992, 20-year period, BYU was 18-2. So they had won 18 of the 20 matchups. They were dominant during the 70s and the 80s. Of course, this is when Lavelle Edwards, their infamous coach, who's the stadium is named after, he was coach for a lot of those years. Of course, the 1984 year, that is the year that BYU was awarded the national championship. They were ranked 3rd in the nation when they played Utah that year, when they won 24-14. So it was very blue. It was very BYU throughout the 70s, throughout the 80s, and into the 90s. Utah football was just not very good from what I read, from what I understood during that time period. They just didn't recruit as well. BYU was a big brand. BYU was a dominant force. They were ranked in most of these matchups throughout the years. And then in the 90s, things started to kind of shift from 93 to 2002. So for the next decade, it kind of went back and forth. Utah had the advantage 6-4, but it was just kind of back and forth every year. Neither team was particularly that great. BYU was ranked a couple times in those matchups. And then from 2002 to now, so another 20 years, Utah has dominated the rivalry. Gone, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. 14-4 in favor of Utah in the last 20 years. Of course, that's when Kyle Whittingham came onto the scene, and Utah's been pretty much a household name in college football since then. BYU has had some up and down years. Some years they've been good, some years they've been not so good. But some really fun games during the Kyle Whittingham and Bronco Mendenhall era. Bronco Mendenhall, of course, coach of BYU during the early 2000s to mid 2000s. Fun time. And then up until 2011, I think it was, is what I read. 2011 is when Utah left the Mountain West and went to the Pac-12, and BYU left and became independent. So they left the conference. It was no longer a conference matchup. They were no longer in the Mountain West conference rivals anymore. It was now just the in-state rivalry. Of course, BYU was an independent, and Utah in the Pac-12. They continued it for a couple years. They played in 2012. They played in 2013. But then they pretty much, they didn't stop the rivalry, but they kind of slowed it down because, being in different conferences, they wanted to play different teams. There's probably a lot more that went into it. But they actually met in the 2015 Las Vegas Bowl down in Las Vegas. It was the first time ever that they had played in the postseason against each other. Utah versus BYU. I remember watching this game. It was absolutely insane. Utah scored 35 points in the first quarter. I think they forced 5 turnovers in that first quarter. There was like a pick 6. There was a fumble 6. There was like another strip fumble, another pick. Anyways, pretty much every single time BYU had the ball, they threw an interception and they fumbled, and Utah scored. So it was 35-0 after the first quarter. BYU made a late push and almost came back to tie it at the end, but Utah held on. Very crazy game. And then the next couple, I missed some of these since I was serving a mission in Canada. I missed the 2018 and the 2019, and frankly, I don't really remember the 2017, but I do remember the 2016 game. BYU scored at the end and tried to go for 2, but Utah stopped them. Pretty much just typical stuff that you see in a rivalry where you go for you go for the throat, you go for the kill shot. There's been games where they've missed a field goal or a field goal's been blocked. I think it was 2009 or 2010. It might have been 2010 where BYU missed a field goal. The Utah fans rushed the field. They got a penalty, so they re-kicked it, and then it was blocked, and then they re-rushed the field. It was crazy. Crazy stuff has happened here in the rivalry, of course, and it's really, really fun. And of course, the last matchup was September 11th, 2021. BYU won that game 26-17, which is the current. They hold the current streak. They're the current owners of the rivalry. So that's a little history there. Those are the results, talking about kind of what's happened and what to expect. A little, I don't know, just kind of personal experience. When I was in elementary school, so I was in elementary school during the early 2000s, early 2010s, if that makes sense. So from like 2005 to 2011 or 2012, I was in elementary school. So during those years, obviously the BYU and Utah rivalry was as hot as ever. And it was so interesting because on the playground, you were either a BYU fan or a Utah fan, and there was contention and there was beef, even though we were young kids. And like, you're supposed to get along with everyone as a kid, right? We had our ground duty, kind of an adult supervisor who was out at recess with us, who would literally ban us from any sort of BYU Utah talk because it really got out of hand. Like, kids were getting bullied. People were making fun. People were taking sides, and it was really just a divisive time for my elementary school. It's probably a little more dramatic than what I'm making it sound. Probably less dramatic than I'm making it sound. But I always remember it was super intense, and it was like you were BYU or Utah. And when I was younger, I was more inclined to support Utah for sure. Now I still support them, but I wouldn't say I'm a big fan necessarily. In my older years, I've just really become a bigger fan of Oklahoma, and that's really my team, and that's really, I've latched onto that. And then of course I went to Utah State. That is my alumni. So like I support them. And then Utah's kind of that, it's the state team, right? So, I support them as well. But my intensity of fandom for Utah has really, really gone down to the point where I'm not I'm not really bummed if they lose, if that makes sense. Like with Oklahoma, if they lose, I'm in a bad mood. Utah State, they're not very good, so I mean that doesn't affect my mood. But I was much more of a Utah fan as a kid. Let's just say that. And whether that's, I wasn't even raised a Utah fan. My parents both went to Utah State. My brother's a Utah fan, but I think it was mostly because in those elementary years, it was very much like pick a side, and I picked the Utah side, and I was very much on that side, and I really committed to that side. But it's kind of interesting, and it's kind of been like that across the entire state. It's like BYU or Utah. Who do you support? Who is your team? And even those who aren't like super big into football, just like when I was in elementary school, they take a side. They say, let's pick a side. I mean, that's just the nature of life, right? People want to join their clans or their groups. They want to be a part of something. And so they join different sides. And so it's very interesting. I have friends on both sides of the rivalry, of course, BYU and Utah. Let's talk about kind of where things are now in 2024 when they're playing again. Again, now they're both back in the conference, Big 12. A lot of people thought Utah would kind of mop the floor this year in the Big 12. They lost Cam Rising. They've been disappointing. It's been a very, very bad year. They're 4-4, I believe, right? And BYU on the opposite side, everyone thought they would finish either, bottom three, if not the bottom of the Big 12. They are currently on top, ranked number 9 in the nation right now, and have a very good, legit shot to make the 12-team college football playoff. In fact, I bet they will. Looking at the remaining schedule, it looks like they could very well go undefeated. But let's talk about kind of what's going to happen this Saturday. Of course, the game is in Salt Lake City Rice-Eccles Stadium. It's going to be a cold one, 8:15 kick. I'm trying to get tickets. I'm not like super set on going. I like watching games on TV. I'm like totally fine with that. But it would be cool to go to this game. I think the stadium's kind of going to be not necessarily 50-50 split, but maybe, a 60-40, 65-35 kind of thing. There's going to be a lot of blue. I mean, BYU in their last 10, they're 8-2. They haven't lost this year. Of course, their last 2 losses came last year against Oklahoma State and my Oklahoma Sooners. They're looking pretty good this year, honestly. And they've played some good teams. They've played some bad teams too. I'm not saying Utah's going to be their best game on the schedule by far, especially this year, Utah's, really taking a step back. But their next 3 games, if they can get past Utah, they have Kansas at home, they have Arizona State on the road, and then they have Houston at home. So those 3 games are very, very winnable. They get past Utah, they very well could go, 12-0, and that's definitely getting them a spot in the college football playoff. Of course, they have to go to Big 12 championship game and take care of business there. But 12-0 and undefeated, I think that's a very, very good resume. Utah in their last 10, they're 5-5. Of course, this year they're 4-4. So they're coming off of some bad games, bad quarterback play. They're on a 4-game losing streak. Of course, Cam Rising came back for 1 game and then he was out for the year. Monty Parks, his wide receiver, is going to be out for the year. Isaac Wilson is questionable. They don't know if they're going to go with him or if they're going to go with Brendan Rose. Regardless, their offense is going to need to figure something out because BYU's defense is pretty good. BYU's offense is clicking very well. BYU is just a complete team on both sides of the ball. Utah has a good defense, but a good defense only goes so far when the offense is doing nothing. Of course, my years as a Denver Broncos fan recently where the offense has been dog water and the defense has been elite, it's really gotten you nowhere. It's gotten you to a 7-10 season, a 9-8 season. So really, Utah is going to need to figure out some way to get some offense going, or they're not going to survive this game. It's going to be a quick and easy path to victory for BYU. But before we get out of hand and just say BYU is going to stomp all over Utah, let's see what's at stake. Of course, I talked about how BYU is trying to get to the college football playoff. They're currently ranked number 9 right now. They were 8-0 overall, 5-0 in Big 12 play. And they're really hoping, to go undefeated, essentially. At this point, any loss could dent their chances. 1 loss still keeps them in the mix, but, you just got to win the game at hand, right? You can't be like, oh, we'll lose this game and then we'll win the next couple games. That's just not how it works. You play for the game, you focus 1 game at a time, and you try to win. So, and Utah, of course, 4-4, they're out of the mix for the Big 12, but really, they could win a couple games and get a bowl game, but they're not going to get a good one. Really, this is just about bragging rights. This is just about spoiling BYU's day. This is about submitting their name in the Holy War history by being like, hey, remember that year that BYU was about to go to the college football playoff and we were dog water and we freaking went in there and slaughtered them. They're really trying to make a big name for themselves. So don't count out Utah. There's a lot of juice flowing in that locker room right now. They really want to get after BYU. They really want to make this, a game. So, personally, I do think BYU is going to win. Obviously, BYU is having the better season. They're the better team right now. But the game's in Rice-Eccles Stadium. It's at the University of Utah. Utah has the juice in this rivalry game. They've kind of owned BYU in the last 20 years, at least in the rivalry. So, don't be surprised if it's actually a good game, if it's closer, if it, I won't go as far as to say don't be surprised if Utah wins. But, anything could happen in the Holy War. So it's going to be fun regardless of the outcome, just the atmosphere and the buildup. Let me know what you guys think down below. Who do you think is going to win? Who are you guys supporting? Again, this game is Saturday night, primetime, 8:15 kick. It's going to be late. It's going to be fun. And we are going to find out who wins the next edition of the Holy War. All right, guys, there's my little spiel on the Holy War. Let me do my NFL picks real quick and then get you out of here. I know your guys' time is precious. Hopefully you guys are still tuned in for my fun little episode that I did. But anyways, let's go to NFL Pick'em. I am still in the lead in my group. I have 99 correct, 39 wrong. Nobody is catching me unless bearing an absolute terrible week this week. Last week I went 12-3. Pretty good. I was hoping to go 14-1, but the Texans blew it. And then I chose the Cowboys. I'm never doing that again. But let's focus on week 10. Thursday night football is the Cincinnati Bengals visiting the Baltimore Ravens. Ravens, of course, coming off a huge win against my Denver Broncos. Beat them 41-10, a very good defense, and they just put up 41 points on them. I have no reason to doubt that the Baltimore Ravens will continue to roll. The Bengals are looking better, but still, this game's in Baltimore. Give me Lamar Jackson, prime time. They'll go to 7-3 after Thursday. We go to Germany for another international NFL game. I like these games a lot. This one, is not the most exciting matchup. It's probably the most least exciting matchup they could have come up with. But the New York Giants against the Carolina Panthers in this one. Panthers coming off a win against the Saints, which is great for Bryce Young. They're going to roll with him, even though Andy Dalton's feeling better, which I think is good. I think you let him go for this year and let him do his best. And if he doesn't, then maybe you reevaluate in the offseason. But I'm going to actually take the Giants in this one. The Panthers have a horrible defense, the worst defense in the league, and their offense is spotty at best. Giants' offense is not any better, but at least they have the defense. I'm going to go with the New York Giants in this one. Patriots at Bears. Give me the Bears in this one. They just got embarrassed by the Cardinals, which is very embarrassing. But give me the Bears in this one. The Patriots are probably the worst, if not, second worst team in the league. Colts and Bills. I like the Bills in this one. Colts have a tough defense, so maybe this game will be a low scoring, a little closer than you think. But Joe Flacco, bless his heart, cool guy. He's just not going to outplay Josh Allen. Denver Broncos at Kansas City Chiefs. The Chiefs, you can't let the Chiefs go to overtime. Has anyone not learned their lesson? I like the Chiefs at home against this one, against the Broncos. Bo Nix still has a lot to improve. Last game was kind of a lot of missed opportunities. So if they can just capitalize on opportunities, this game will be close. But I like the Chiefs in this one. Falcons at Saints. Give me the Falcons in this one. They look like they're going to win the NFC South this year. 49ers and Buccaneers. I like the Niners in this one. Even though Baker Mayfield always gives the Bucs a chance, that team has heart and soul, and I love Baker with all my heart and soul. Give me the 49ers, though. I think Christian McCaffrey is potentially going to come back. But even if he doesn't, Jordan Mason, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, Brock Purdy, that elite defense, I think they'll get it done. Now, this is an interesting matchup, and this one is going to be hard for me to pick. The Steelers visit the Washington Commanders. The Commanders, 7-2 for the first time since I don't know how, whatever that stat is. This should be the game of the week for sure. Steelers, very good defense. Commanders, great offense. It's going to come down to not Jaden Daniels, but the quarterback of the Steelers, Russell Wilson. Can their offense put up points? Because Washington Commanders defense is okay. It's not bad. It's not good. But the Steelers defense can keep Jaden Daniels in check. Can Russell Wilson show up? We'll find out. I'm going to pick the Steelers in this one. This might be my upset pick of the week, but I'm going to go with the Pittsburgh Steelers over the Commanders. Vikings at Jags. Give me the Vikings in this one. Could be a fun game. The Jags, have made the last couple games interesting. They made the game against Philadelphia interesting. They have the potential to really show up. Their defense is not great, but it shows glimpses. Trevor Lawrence, he might not go. And if he doesn't go, then for sure they'll lose. But if he does go, could be a close game. I'm still rolling with the Vikings. Titans at Chargers. I like the Chargers in this one. Not much to say there. Eagles versus Cowboys. Give me the Eagles. Fly, Eagles, fly. The Cowboys are in shambles now that Dak Prescott's out. And, of course, last week they screwed me, so I'm never picking them again. Wouldn't be surprised if they go 4-13 for the year. Jets at Cardinals. I like the Cardinals in this one, even though the Jets had a big, big win over the Texans. Pretty much, I don't know if it saved their season because their season's kind of in the toilet right now at 3-6, but it definitely boosted their morale, gave them something to, cheer about, something to look forward to. Could be a fun game down in the desert against the Cardinals, but Kyler Murray is playing well. The run game's going well with James Conner. I like the Cardinals. Sunday Night Football. Dun, 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 dun. Lions at Texans. Now, this is a matchup. This is Sunday Night Football at its finest. Lions at Texans. This game should be real fun. I like the Lions. The Lions are looking really good. I'm really hoping this year the Lions have a shot at the Chiefs and can take them out because they have the offense to do it. Their defense is much improved. Dan Campbell, Jared Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown doing the handstand celly. If you haven't seen it, where he's just on his head. Beautiful. Shout out to that incarnate word. Wide receiver for starting the most incredible trend ever. Should be a close game. CJ Stroud had a bad game last week. He's missing some pieces at wide receivers. That's why I'm going with the Lions. And then Monday Night Football, Dolphins and Rams. Honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if the Dolphins win this one. I'm going to pick the Dolphins. I might change my pick back to the Rams, depending on, kind of how things go, how things look. But honestly, Dolphins could very much win this game. They almost took out Buffalo in Buffalo last week. Tua's back, Tyreek Hill's back, Jalen Waddle, Mostert, Devon Achane. Whenever those guys are there, they have a shot. Their defense needs to really step up and keep Matthew Stafford at bay. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Dolphins win, so I'm going to pick the Dolphins. All right, guys, those were my picks for the week, and that is the Fan Talk podcast for you. The Holy War set to take another stage going on this Saturday. So let me know, again, who you guys are supporting, who you think will win, and we will see this Saturday who gets the bragging rights moving forward. Again, thank you guys so much for tuning in to Fan Talk. You can find this podcast anywhere you get your podcasts. Leave a comment, leave a like, and we'll see you guys next week for another edition of Fan Talk.